It's PLB with MLB News, back with another video. Today's video is going to be steal 26 players and build a roster. I found this article on MLBTradeRumors.com. So, you can find a link to that in the description below. So, this says, here's a fun exercise during a time without much real baseball, except at KBO. Obviously, I've done a lot of videos on that. Some links to those will be in the description below. Imagine you're an expansion general manager who can take one player from 26 of the game's 30's roster, so you have to pass on 4 teams to build a full major league team. You can't steal any prospects, though. So let's go ahead and... I did one myself. The person who wrote this also did one. So let's go ahead and get into this video. For the Braves, he went with Ronald Acuna Jr. I went with the same Ronald Acuna Jr. Obviously, you could go with Freddie Freeman here, but I went with Ronald Acuna Jr. because I think him and the other 2 people that I have in the outfield would be really good in the outfield. Next, for the Nationals, they went with Juan Soto. I went with Max Scherzer. I think Max Scherzer would be great at the top of my rotation. Next, for the Mets, obviously, this is Jacob deGrom. Obviously, you could probably go Pete Alonso too here, but I went with Jacob deGrom. Phillies, they went with Aaron Nola. I went with JT Realmuto, a catcher, because I needed a catcher, and I felt like JT Realmuto could be a great starting catcher because he is the best catcher in the MLB. Next, for the Marlins, I went with a pass here. The Marlins don't have a lot of good players. I could have obviously went with Jonathan Villar or Brian Anderson, but they both would have been on my bench, and I just feel like they wouldn't have fit very well in my bench. Next, for the Brewers, I went with Christian Yelich, but they went with Josh Hader. Obviously, you could go with either, but I went with Christian Yelich here because I do have some other good relievers. For the Cardinals, I went with Paul Goldschmidt since I did not pick Freddie Freeman. He's the second best first baseman in the game, and I figured if I'm not going to go with Freddie Freeman or Pete Alonso, I've got to go with Paul Goldschmidt there. The person who wrote this article went with Jack Flaherty, which you could also go with, but I went with another starting pitcher instead of Jack Flaherty. Next, for the Cubs, they went with Wilson Contreras as their starting catcher. I went with JT Realmuto, obviously. For the Cubs, I went with Chris Bryant, put him at third base. I think he would be a good fit on the roster that I have. Next, for the Reds, he went with a pass. I went with Luis Castillo. Luis Castillo is a good starting pitcher. He is going to be at the back end of my rotation. For the Pirates, I went with a pass, and whoever wrote the article went with Ryan Reynolds. Obviously, I can understand that he was a really good rookie, a top left fielder in the game, but I went with a pass. I used one of my passes, so I've done 2 passes, so yeah. Next, for the National League West, I went with a couple relief pitchers in this division. First, for the Padres, I went with Kirby Yates. They went with Emilio Pagan. They're both good relievers. They're both closers. I had a Emilio Pagan trade package in my way too early 2020 MLB trade deadline predictions. If you have not yet watched that, link in the description below to that. For the Dodgers, I went with Kenley Jansen. I was like, I need another reliever, possibly an 8th inning person because Kirby Yates is a good closer. And I thought Kenley Jansen would be the perfect pitcher to put in the 8th inning. They went with Walker Buehler here, which I can get, but I went with some other starting pitchers instead of Walker Buehler. For the Diamondbacks, Ketel Marte, I went with Ketel Marte too. Ketel Marte, you definitely have to pick him. He was like second or third in the MVP race. For the Giants, I went with for the Giants, I actually went with a reliever, Tony Watson. I needed a left-handed relief pitcher in my in my pen, and I was like, hi, Tony Watson is the perfect fit. For the Rockies, I went with Trevor Story, their shortstop. I went with Chris Bryant at shortstop. That's why I didn't pick Nolan Arenado. They went with Scott Oberg, a reliever. Next, for the Padres, they went with Emilio Pagan. Wait. Okay, that's it for that division. Now to the American League East, where they picked for the Yankees Gleyber Torres. I went with starting pitching here, and I went with Garrett Cole, their new acquisition in the offseason. Obviously, I wish Garrett Cole would have gone to the Angels. I really do. Next, the Rays, I went with Nick Anderson. Obviously, I need a couple more relievers. I went with Nick Anderson. Next, for the Red Sox, I needed a DH. So, I went with J.D. Martinez, one of the better DH hitters in the game. Next, for the Blue Jays, I was going to go with a pass, but then I decided I need another reliever that's really good, and I went with Ken Giles. Obviously, he should have been traded at the 2019 trade deadline, but he was not. Maybe he will be traded at the 2020 trade deadline. I did not have a trade proposal in that video. Next, for the Orioles, I think most people, obviously, when they're picking this roster, they would have gone with a pass because the Orioles are one of the worst teams. Next, to the American League Central, for the Twins, I went with a pass. Obviously, there's a lot of good hitters on that team, but they didn't really fit with my team, so I went with a pass, and they went with Taylor Rogers. The person who wrote this went with Taylor Rogers. For the Indians, they went with Shane Bieber. I went with another reliever here, and I went with Brad Hand. Another great reliever, a left-handed reliever. Next, for the White Sox, I went with Yasmani Grandal as my backup catcher. Obviously, you could put him as a starting catcher. They went with Aaron Bummer. You also could have gone with Lucas Giolito or even Dallas Keuchel and put him as like a sixth starter. Or maybe a Tim Anderson, Yohan Moncada. Put them as a maybe backup. Next for the Royals, this is a pretty obvious choice in my opinion, Whit Merrifield. He is on my bench, but he is still a good player. You could probably argue that he should be the starting second baseman. Next for the Tigers, I did not go with a pass because I've already done my 4 passes, so I pretty much... Yeah, so I had to go with someone here, and I went with C.J. Crone as a bench bat. I think he could be a good bench bat. Hopefully he will have a breakout season with the Tigers, former Angel. American League West. Let's start off with the Angels because this one's pretty obvious, Mike Trout. There's nobody else to go with. He's the best player in baseball. Next for the Trash Can Bangers, Houston Astros, Justin Verlander. I went with another starting pitcher. Obviously, they do have some good hitting in Alex Bregman, Carlos Correa, Jose Altuve, maybe even Michael Brantley. But I thought I needed a starting pitcher, and he would be a good 2 or 3 in my rotation. Next, for the Oakland Athletics, I went with Liam Hendricks, a reliever who had a breakout season in 2019. I feel like this was kind of an obvious choice for me. Obviously, I don't need Matt Chapman or Matt Olson, who are their better players. Next, for the Rangers, I went with Jose Lyric, their really good reliever, pretty much one of the only really good relievers they have. The person who wrote this went with the same. Mariners. He went with Tom Murphy. I don't really agree with this one. I went with Daniel Vogelback. Now let's go ahead and get into my roster. My starting lineup. At catcher, I have starting JT Realmuto. The best catcher in baseball, I definitely think I would put him as a starter. Yasmani Grandal is also really good, but I have him on the bench. First base, Paul Goldschmidt. Second best first baseman in the major leagues. I went with Ronald Acuna instead of Freddie Freeman, so I needed a first baseman, and I obviously did not go with Pete Alonso, so I needed a first baseman, and I felt like Paul Goldschmidt is going to be a perfect fit on this team. Next, at second base, you can argue Whit Merrifield, and Whit Merrifield is very good, but I am going to go with Ketel Marte, who was top 5 in the MVP race in the NL in 2019. I think he will have another breakout season in 2020. Next, at third base, I have Chris Bryant. He's one of the best third basemen in the game. Obviously, there's a lot of good third basemen in the game. That's why he's not at the top. Next, my shortstop is Trevor Story. He is really good. He's one of the better shortstops in the major leagues. Next, in left field, I have Ronald Acuna Jr. Center field, Mike Trout, obviously. Right field, Christian Yelich. You could put Christian Yelich in left field if you want to, and Ronald Acuna in right, but it doesn't really matter. DH, JD Martinez. And on my bench, I have Whit Merrifield, Yasmani Grandal, CJ Crone, and Daniel Vogelbach. Now my starting pitching. As my ace, I have Jacob deGrom. Number 2 is Max Scherzer. Number 3 is Justin Verlander. Number 4 is Garrett Cole. And number 5 is Luis Castillo. Now my relief pitchers. Brad Hand, Nick Anderson, Jose Lyric, Liam Hendricks, Kenley Jansen, Kirby Yates, and Tony Watson. Now let's look at the person who wrote this roster. His starting lineup is catcher Wilson Contreras, first baseman Matt Olson, second baseman Ketel Marte, shortstop Gleyber Torres, third baseman Rafael Devers, center field Mike Trout, right field Ronald Acuna, left field Juan Soto, and designated hitter Yordan Alvarez. Bench, Brian Anderson, Brian Reynolds, Tom Murphy, and Whit Merrifield. Rotation, Jacob deGrom, Aaron Nola, Walker Buehler, Jack Flaherty, and Shane Bieber. And his bullpen was not that good. Scott Oberg, who's not very good. Emilio Pagan, Josh Hader. Both of those are very good. Nick Anderson, Ken Giles, Jose Lyric, Taylor Rogers, and Aaron Bummer. I feel like I picked a lot of the relievers that he picked. So, yeah. If you like this kind of content on the channel, like, subscribe, turn on notifications so you will get notified whenever I upload. Thank you for watching, and I will be back with more videos soon.